Today I'd like to talk about a fascinating conversion story. I'd like to talk about the conversion of a man who advocated for atheism for more than 50 years before converting. His story is told in the book There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheists Changed His Mind. It was published in 2007 by Antony in collaboration with Roy Abraham Varghese. In that book, the formerly famous atheist Antony describes his journey from atheism to the conviction that God exists. He points out several times that he arrived at his conclusion by reason alone, and that he didn't have any religious experience that led to his conversion. In this video, I will summarize the reasons for his conversion, which he outlined in the book, and I will talk about his journey that led to this conversion. But before I do that, I will give you a short introduction to the author, and I will provide you some context and commentary to his approach to religion by reason alone. So Antony was an English philosopher specialized in the philosophy of religion. At the age of 15, he concluded that there was no God, and later he became an advocate of atheism for about half a century. In 2004, at the age of 81, he stated that he now believed in the existence of an intelligent designer of the universe, and he explained that he had become a deist. In case you're unfamiliar with the term deist, it's not the same thing as a theist. A deist is someone who believes in the existence of God solely based on rational thought, without any reliance on revealed religions or religious authority. To quote Mr. Flew directly, I must say again that the journey to my discovery of the divine has thus far been a pilgrimage of reason. I have followed the argument where it has led me, and it has led me to accept the existence of a self-existence, immutable, immaterial, omnipotent, and omniscient being. So he became a deist as opposed to a theist, who would be someone who, in addition to pure rational thought, also accepts divine revelation as a source for their convictions. Here I find it important to know that the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches the following. Our Holy Mother the Church holds and teaches that God, the first principle and last end of all things, can be known with certainty from the created world by the natural light of human reason. Without this capacity, man would not be able to welcome God's revelation. Man has this capacity because he is created in the image of God. Antony did exactly what is described here. He arrived at the certain conclusion that God exists by reason alone. By reason alone, it can be known with certainty that an omnipotent, omniscient, timeless, spaceless, benevolent, and intelligent being exists. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that it's possible to know, not only believe, but know that a being with those characteristics exists, and this being is commonly referred to as God. But don't worry if you're a Christian who isn't that sure that God exists, because St. Thomas Aquinas explains that people that are not sure whether God exists can still accept his existence through justified belief. I found this out recently, and I think it's absolutely worth sharing with you. It's possible to be Catholic and a so-called weak agnostic who essentially holds that I don't know if God exists, but it can be known that he exists. But a Catholic cannot be a so-called strong agnostic who holds that I don't know if God exists and no one can know if he exists. In summary, you don't have to be sure that God exists to be a Catholic, but it's possible to be sure that God exists. The last thing that I'd like to mention here for the sake of completeness is that other characteristics of God cannot be deduced by reason alone, like for example, the doctrine of the Trinity. Here, divine revelation is necessary to know things like that. Now let's continue with Mr. and his journey to deism. So as I mentioned before, Antony became an atheist at the age of 15, and he writes in his book that he had reached that conclusion much too quickly, much too easily, and for reasons that later turned out to be wrong. Those reasons for him becoming an atheist were the following. As I have mentioned, the grounds on which I embraced atheism at the age of 15 were clearly inadequate. They were built on what I later described as two juvenile insistencies. First, the problem of evil was a decisive disproof of the existence of an all-good, all-powerful God. And second, the free will defense did not relieve the Creator of responsibility for the manifest ills of creation. After more than 50 years as an advocate for atheism, the advances of science allowed him to make conclusions about the existence of God. Just for context, I'd like to mention that when Antony started out as an atheist, the scientific landscape really differed from today. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because while reading the book, I was surprised what scientific advances he named, because for me they seemed like common knowledge. But keep in mind, Antony became an atheist in the 1940s. As he himself writes, at the beginning of the 20th century, most scientists assumed that the universe didn't have a beginning or an end, and the Big Bang Theory changed that. As the Bible says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, it's crucial that there indeed was a beginning, and the scientific evidence for that was found in the course of the 20th century. What I'd also like to mention here is that the author relied on philosophical arguments for God's existence. Some people might say that philosophy can't prove anything because there will always be someone who disagrees. But Mr. Flu said something very important about that in the book, namely that there is a difference between producing a proof and persuading a person. Some people are persuaded by bad arguments, and others are unconvinced by arguments that should be accepted. So what were his reasons for concluding God's existence? Mr. Flu summarized his reasons for the conviction that God exists as follows. Science spotlights three dimensions of nature that point to God. The first is the fact that nature obeys laws. The second is the dimension of life, of intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings which arose from matter. The third is the very existence of nature. But it's not science alone that guided me. I have also been helped by a renewed study of the classical philosophical arguments. Apart from that, the author also writes about other arguments, like the argument from fine-tuning. If you've watched my video on the book Has Science Buried God, you know that I didn't like the fact that the author John Lennox, who is a mathematician and apologist, extensively relied on arguments from biology. And I didn't like that because that was outside of his area of expertise. In the case of Antony Flew, a similar objection might come to mind, as he relied on arguments from science to deduce God's existence as a philosopher. However, as he himself explains in the book, there's a difference between doing science and drawing philosophical conclusions from scientific data. I fully agree with that, and I'd like to say that the author stayed true to that and really only argued on philosophical grounds while using conclusions from science. Here I'd like to read a quote from Erwin Schrödinger, which was included in the book. The scientific picture of the world around me is very deficient. It gives me a lot of factual information, puts all our experiences in a magnificently consistent order, but is ghastly silent about all that is really near to our heart, that really matters to us. It cannot tell a word about the sensation of red and blue, bitter and sweet, feelings of delight and sorrow. It knows nothing of beauty and ugly, good or bad, God and eternity. Science sometimes pretends to answer questions in these domains, but the answers are very often so silly that we're not inclined to take them seriously. Science is, very usually, branded as being atheistic. After what I've said, this is not astonishing. If its world picture does not even contain beauty, delight, sorrow, if personality is cut out of it by agreement, how should it contain the most sublime idea that presents itself to the human mind? I won't go into any detail with any of his arguments for God's existence, but I'd like to make a couple of remarks. So, as we've heard, one of his arguments for the existence of God relies on the existence of life. What fascinates him here is how mindless matter produced teleological beings, so beings that have intrinsic ends and which have the capability to self-replicate. This is interesting because Francis Collins, who is specialized in genetics, said that relying on the fact that we don't know how life arose commits the God of the gaps fallacy. I've mentioned that at the beginning of my previous video where I reviewed this book by Francis Collins. I'm not sure what to make of this, and it might be that Mr. Flew and Mr. Collins were talking about different versions of the argument, because Antony Flew looks at it from a philosophical perspective, while Francis Collins was talking about it from a scientific perspective. So I leave it up to you what you make of that argument and whether you find it worth using in debates, but I'd like to mention a good response to one particular objection to that argument. In the book 7 Days That Divide the World, Professor Lennox responds to the objection that this argument would crumble as soon as someone managed to produce life in a petri dish. And Professor Lennox responds by saying that this particular objection would not show that God wasn't involved, because if someone managed to create life in a petri dish, that would demonstrate that life can be created from matter with an intelligence. So that would exactly show that an intelligence is necessary to create life. Antony Flew also talks about the fine-tuning of the universe as an indicator of God's existence. And whenever you use that argument in a debate, you might encounter the multiverse objection, which essentially states that there could simply be very many universes, and so the probability that one is fine-tuned isn't actually that low. What the author responds to that is that, first of all, there is no evidence for the existence of multiple universes, and secondly, the multiverse theory makes the concept of scientific explanation meaningless, as it explains everything and nothing at once. Apart from that, even if multiple universes existed, they still would be governed by laws that gave rise to one fine-tuned universe, and the question would remain where this meta-law, or law of laws, came from, and so the whole problem wouldn't be solved, but only shifted up one level. I think that the multiverse theory is a beautiful example of the fact that if someone wants to doubt God's existence, they absolutely can. But at the same time, it wouldn't be irrational to come to believe in God. This shows how God preserved our free will in our journey to Him. The author also sympathized with Christianity and included a dialogue about Christianity with N.T. Wright in the appendix. Antony wrote the following about Christianity in his book. Today, I would say the claim concerning the resurrection is more impressive than any by the religious competition. I think the claim that God was incarnate in Jesus Christ is unique. It is difficult, I think, to realize how you're going to judge this other than by believing it or not believing. I cannot quite see that there are general principles to guide you in this. And he also said, as I've said more than once, no other religion enjoys anything like the combination of a charismatic figure like Jesus and a first-class intellectual like St. Paul. If you're wanting omnipotence to set up a religion, it seems to me that this is the one to beat. As I said before, Antony became a deist and never a Christian or any type of theist. A possible reason why he never developed a clearer position regarding theism or Christianity is that he died 3 years after the publication of this book, and during those 3 years he had dementia. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. I really enjoyed the book because it's a captivating story and it's easy to follow. The author doesn't go into much depth with his arguments, but I don't think that that's a problem because the fascinating part about the book is the fact that the author was a well-known atheist for over 50 years. I will give the book a 9 out of 10 simply because the book isn't life-changing, or I wouldn't call it a must-read. You can learn more from books which go deeper into those arguments. But I'd say that this book is perfect if you're interested in apologetics and want a book that isn't hard to understand but still a page-turner. So for example, if it's currently really hot outside or you're on a vacation and you're just not in the mood for a complex theological book, I think this book is great. That's been it for today. See you soon, God bless, and bye!